Okay, let's talk about some little tricks that might be able to make our command line a little more, I'd say a little more flexible, a little easier to use. So, first thing we want to talk about is the bash history. So, bash keeps a history of all of the commands that you have entered into it, and you can access it just using the command history. And this will show you, in this case, I have 580 commands that I've done recently. If I want to view it a page at a time, I can pipe it to more, and that'll let me view it a page at a time. If I want to search it, let me control C out of there. If I want to search it using grep, I can do that. So let me do history, pipe that to grep, and I just want to look at commands where I've done sudo, and that will show me all of my sudo commands that I've done. Now you'll notice right here beside the command, it's going to give you right at the beginning of the command, it's going to give you a number. And that number is the command number. And you can use that to re-execute a command. So for example, I have the sudo apt update, and that's command number 364. So I can execute that command just by doing exclamation point 364, and it will re-execute that command. So that can be kind of useful sometimes, especially if there are commands you do on a regular basis or fairly long commands. That's one way to access them. You can also access them, by the way, by using your up and down arrows, but then you've got to scroll through the entire thing. So what if I want to remove a command from my history? For example, command number 582 is where I did history and piped it to grep. Now, we might want to do this if we have a command in our history where we put in a plain text password or something like that. So if I want to remove that, I can do history -d and then the command that I want to remove, 582. Now, if I do a history, we're going to see that that command that we entered has now been removed. In fact, with 583, we'll see where that went away and where we did the history -d 582, and then it just renumbers everything. So if I want to remove things from history, that's a great way to do it. Another little trick, if you're going to do something that you don't want to show up in history, you can put a space bar in front of it. So I'm going to do space bar sudo cat /etc/shadow. That'll be a good one. Okay, that executes the command for me, but when I do my history, notice it doesn't show that there. And that's because I put a space in front of it. That, by the way, is a default on Ubuntu with the bash shell. Some other distributions of Linux do not have that default. There is a way that you can set it, and that's by editing your profile, your bash profile. So speaking of hidden files, all of this history is kept in I'm going to do an lsla, and you're going to see a bash dot or dot bash underscore history. So that's where all of these commands are located at. If I delete that file, it basically wipes out my history. Now, there are two different schools of thought on this, and let me go through it real quick. Some people really, really like keeping that history. They find it incredibly useful to be able to go back through and re-execute commands. One weakness that I see with that is I see people sometimes when they see something wrong on their system, rather than just fixing what's in front of them, they will sometimes go through their history to try to figure out why. And I see this a lot with administrators trying to prove that they did everything right and they think the system screwed up. So they go through to try to prove I did this. And so they'll spend way too much time poring over their command history. I'm going to encourage you not to do that. Don't try to figure out what happened. Just don't try to figure out why it happened, what command was entered correctly or not entered. Don't worry about it. Just fix what's in front of you. It'll save yourself a lot of time and a lot of frustration. Okay, let's talk about a couple of other things that are useful. And some of them we've demoed without really talking about them, but now we'll actually talk about them. Let's say I want a cat etc shadow. Now I actually can't do this without sudoing it, and so it says permission denied. So one of our little shortcuts is we can do sudo and then 2 exclamation points, or some people call them bangs. So you'll hear them refer to that as sudo bang bang. And what that does is that just takes whatever command you had previously entered, the previous command, and executes it using sudo. So that's really, really helpful if, like me, you get in a hurry and you forget to type sudo on your commands. Just being able to do sudo exclamation point saves you from retyping the whole command. Another little useful tool is tab completion. So for example, I'm going to do an LSL on the /home directory, and you're going to see here I have a folder, a Smith. So if I do cd /home /a tab, it's actually not doing my tab completion for me at the moment. Let's see, cd space /home /a Smith. All right, that takes me there. cd /home /p. There we go. That time it took it. I must have hit the wrong key. So I hit the tab and it automatically completes it to P. Peters, or cd /home /sa tab takes me to sales. So it completes the command or the path for me. So tab completion is really useful. Another thing that's kind of useful goes along with it. Let's do cd /home I don't remember what all my options are. So I can double tap tab and that will tell me what all of my options are. A. Smith, David, P. Peter, sales. Oh, and it returns me to where I was. So then I can go ahead and put in whatever I needed. Now I can do this with commands as well. So I can do, here's a fun one. Let me do L tab. And it says, there's 106 possibilities that start with L. Do you want to see all of them? Yeah, let me see all of them. And it's going to show me all of my commands that start with L. Or let me do LE tab. And now you'll see I have a little bit less, no pun intended. I have just a handful of commands, and then it returns me to my LE so I can keep typing whatever it is. So that can be really useful if you forget the name of a command. Another one, and another thing that I find really useful, let me do a sudo apt update ampersand sudo apt upgrade. Now, this executes both commands, but it does it in an and sense. So it only does the second command if the first command completes successfully. So first command works, then it'll execute the second command. Now, if I want to know if this worked, by the way, obviously it did because it tried to do it. But how do we know if a command is successful? Well, obviously no error messages, but there's actually a little bit more to it than that. Every time you run a command, that command returns an exit code. And that exit code, if an exit code is 0, then the command worked successfully. If it is anything else, it did not. And I can view that exit code using the command echo $? And that will show me my most recent exit code. Now, another thing I can do a sudo apt update sudo apt upgrade. Now this is doing this, by the way, this works with more than just these two commands. More than just apt update and apt upgrade. What this does, the semicolon does kind of the same thing as the double ampersand, but the double ampersand will execute the second command only if the first command succeeded. The semicolon will execute the second command even if the first command did not. So be careful with that one. It's convenient, but there are some ways that could go a little haywire on you as well. Especially if the first command was supposed to do something the second command was supposed to take advantage of. And if it failed, then that might create an issue. That, by the way, is basically the same as doing the command separately on two different lines, except that you get to see if the command worked or not. Okay, so there's a few tips and tricks that hopefully will be useful to you as you're working in the Bash shell.